morning. It is Monday, May 11th, 2015. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. Coming up later today, Yemen rebels back a 5-day ceasefire set to begin tomorrow amid Saudi-led airstrikes. Britain is adjusting to a new era after the shock election victory for Prime Minister David Cameron decapitated the opposition and opened the door for many questions about Britain's future role in the European Union. And later on the show, the devastation in Nepal 2 weeks after the earthquake in pictures taken by Israeli photographer Ziv Cohen, who has recently returned from the disaster area. Good morning, I'm Yael Levi, and we begin in Yemen, where Shia rebels and their allies in the country's splintered armed forces said they would accept a 5-day humanitarian ceasefire to allow aid to reach civilians after more than a month of daily airstrikes from a Saudi-led military coalition. The ceasefire, scheduled to begin Tuesday, would help ease the suffering of civilians in the Arab world's poorest country, who increasingly lack food. However, all sides in the conflict that has seen the exile of Western-backed President Hadi to Saudi Arabia, as well as hundreds of civilians dead in the battles between Iran's proxy militia, the Houthis, and the Yemen regime, said that they would retaliate if the ceasefire is broken. In other words, it's a very fragile one, to say the least. We are joined in studio by the director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Tel Aviv University, Professor Uzi Rabi. Professor Rabi, good morning to you. Before we break this down, let's take a look at the following report from Yemen and break it down.
A sliver of hope, or yet another cynical twist in a tragic plot. Shiite Houthi rebels accepted a Saudi initiative for a 5-day ceasefire in war-torn Yemen Sunday, even as fighting continued across various locations in the country, with airstrikes by a Saudi-led Arab force pounding targets. The ceasefire, if it is indeed upheld, is only scheduled to come into effect later on.
We have made a decision that the ceasefire will begin this Tuesday, May 12th at 11 p.m. and will last for 5 days and is subject to renewal if it works out. The ceasefire will end should the Houthis or their allies not live up to the agreements contained in this issue.
The Houthis are allied with certain elements in the Yemeni army, still loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. An officer belonging to one of these units noted that despite the agreed truce, any attack undertaken by forces under the command of serving President Abdurrabbu Mansur Hadi would be met with force.
We took to the streets against the enemy and against the blockade on the Yemeni people. We will struggle and resist, and we will sacrifice our souls for Yemen, and we will not flee.
As the countdown to Tuesday continues, Saudi-led airstrikes hit ex-President Saleh's compound in the capital of Sana'a. He, however, appears to have escaped unharmed, with this photo going viral over the past day. This cameraman was caught up in the bombing.
Thank God we survived. It's a miracle. While we are covering the story of the house of the former president, several missiles were fired from airstrikes, and I think one of the journalists was injured.
The scheduled break in hostilities is intended to enable humanitarian aid to reach a beleaguered and long-suffering population. Some of that aid is expected to arrive on an Iranian ship set to sail Sunday evening for the Houthi-held port of Hodeidah, carrying 2,500 tons of food and medical supplies. There is hope the humanitarian break will develop into something more substantial. The Houthis have signaled their willingness to open peace talks facilitated by the UN, but have rejected the notion of these taking place in the Saudi capital of Riyadh or any other country involved in the military effort against them. It is often the case in the Middle East that the hours ahead of an expected truce are among the most violent. Those caught in the crossfire will be hoping for an exception.
Joined in studio are Professor Uzi Rabi of Tel Aviv University. Professor Rabi, I want to start with to begin with, because I think for people sitting in the Western world and not knowing what's going on, about 2 weeks ago it was the Saudis came out on stage, announced the end of the airstrikes operation. They've completed their missions. That lasted about 2 seconds. First of all, do we think this ceasefire even is going to hold? And all signs are showing that Yemen is past the point of no return. Correct me if I'm wrong.
First of all, we have passed the no-return line in Yemen, that's for sure. We have here not only the Houthis, but also Al-Qaeda and ISIS. In the other part of Yemen, we should understand that we have a stronghold of what they call Al-Qaeda في جزيرة العرب, which is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. This is their stronghold because this is...
And the Yemen has been a stronghold for Al-Qaeda for at least 2 decades almost.
Definitely,
Okay.
and this was the homeland of the Bin Laden family, the city or the region of Hadramaut. So basically we have here almost all different species and ideologies of the Middle East being gathered and accumulated in Yemen. In the north we have the Houthis supported by the Iranians. In the south, we have Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and they are being supported by Sunni tribes. In the middle, we have the huge tribal confederacies and autonomous, basically, player here, armed militias who are trying actually to better their position. And if you would like to end up, you can go to Aden, where you have a bunch of intellectuals still dreaming on just a restoration to south and north in Yemen. Basically, Yemen has become kind of an example to what we said before, the failure of the nation state. The question is, who are you loyal to? And basically, there are many loyalties, shifting loyalties, tribesmen. So this has become kind of a very, very messy area. And basically, the simple fact that Iran is supporting the Houthis, Saudi Arabia, the others.
Exactly, and which leads me to ask you, because Saudi, as we know, Saudi very heavily involved in the Yemen battles, and doing a coalition, well, airstrikes that they themselves are carrying out, whatnot. The Saudis are not going to give up on Yemen, are they?
Definitely not. This is their sphere of influence. And basically, what counts for the Saudi is not the internal dynamic in Yemen. They couldn't care less about that. What they have in mind is to keep Iran out of Yemen. Now, we have to actually include that in the broader geopolitical picture.
Okay.
For the Saudis, what happened in Iraq after the toppling of Saddam Hussein is that Iraq became sort of an Iranian stronghold. So now, when it comes in Yemen, they feel as if they were put on siege by Iranian strongholds from north and south, and basically they do accuse the Americans and the Europeans for letting Iran actually have the whole road down to the Middle East. And basically, what they are doing in Yemen is sort of a retaliation.
Beautifully said, because I think for people listening, always it sounds always like Star Trek, like people they don't know are fighting in the region. But at the end of the day, it is like a chessboard, isn't it? It's Saudi trying to prevent Iran from having a stronghold on a large chunk of the map that is the region.
Exactly, and I think that we not only actually live behind the nation state paradigm when it comes to Yemen, Syria, Iraq. What we have to do is to adopt these sectarian fault lines. Sunni versus Shi'i, Arab versus Persian, and basically Saudi Arabia and Iran are two ends of the same spectrum. But basically what we got here is kind of an ongoing bloody road. Yeah. And basically this came to Yemen, and Yemen, paradoxically speaking, is becoming, as was the case in the 20th century, sort of a microcosm by which to see actually basically the prevailing camps and the prevailing conflicts in the Middle East. It happened in 1962 when then Saudi Arabia actually was involved in kind of a war against Egypt. It is called the Yemen War, right. 1962-1968. Now, actually, with line or in accordance with what's going on in the Middle East, Yemen is becoming kind of a Saudi-Iranian arena. It is also a prisoner of its geography. We have to take into account the Bab el-Mandab Strait, which is a precious geostrategic asset. So it also has to do with international power. So basically, Yemen is sort of a multi-layered conflict. Right. And we have to take it into account because Yemen is also kind of an example or a reflection of what's going on in the Middle East.
No, entirely. When you look at all the factions fighting, and needless to say, we should also mention that the ceasefire that's about to be announced, or that might take effect as of tomorrow, Tuesday, hopefully will last more than 10 minutes, but is for humanitarian reasons, because the concerns that you are describing at a geopolitical level, still, we have people living in Yemen, and about 1,400 of them already died in these fightings between Iran proxies and obviously the Yemen regime, which is a Saudi proxy. But as Yemen is fighting to survive, the leader of the free world, namely U.S. President Barack Obama, will hold a series of meetings this week in Washington with Gulf state leaders dealing directly with the tectonic shifts the Middle East is undergoing, as Professor Rabi mentioned. Originally, though, the meetings were supposed to be preceded by an audience with King Salman of Saudi Arabia, the U.S. ally. But Saudi Arabia announced yesterday that its new monarch would not be attending a meeting at the White House with President Obama or a summit gathering at Camp David this week in an apparent signal of its Saudis' continued displeasure with the American administration over the relations with Iran, its rising regional adversary. Let's go first now to Times of Israel, Washington, D.C. correspondent Rebecca Shimoni-Stroll. Rebecca, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Let's start with the first news coming out over the course of the last 24 hours, and that is that the King Salman is not going to meet with President Obama, other than the pleasantries that have been announced beforehand. The reasoning behind it being what?
Well, the popular understanding here, despite denials from both sides, is that the reason behind this is that there hasn't been enough leeway granted by the United States for a negotiation that Saudi Arabia would find fruitful regarding an allied front against Iran. That is to say, basically, we're returning to kind of what's becoming a classical theme here, that Saudi Arabia and many other Gulf states are very unhappy with the progress of the P5+1 talks with Iran and are feeling that perhaps the summit in Washington is not going to yield the kind of results that they were perhaps hoping for even a couple weeks ago.
Now, Rebecca, stay with us. We're also joined in studio by Tal Shalev, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent. Tal, good morning to you. We're going to expand this to Israel in a second, but Professor Rabi and Rebecca's still with us on the line. The signaling, these meetings that the American president is trying to have with Gulf state leaders, he's trying to sell them an Iranian idea. What is it that the American administration is not understanding?
Well, what the Americans actually are coming up with a kind of a new strategy in the Middle East, which says kind of an equilibrium between the Shi'i and the Sunni camps. This is kind of a shift or a real drama, because for the GCC states, mainly Saudi Arabia, it seems that the United States actually have left them alone with dealing with what they see kind of a nuclear Iran in the offing.
Or picking a new friend, if you may. Okay.
And basically, this is something that they have to get used to. This is something that the Middle East is not used to. There is no big brother or a patron or a superpower that runs the whole show. These states, especially the tiny sheikdoms of the Gulf, were given birth under the assumption that the West or the free world is going to protect them all the way. Iran was kind of a nightmare. It is the nemesis of Saudi Arabia and some other states in the Gulf. The simple fact that we're going to have moving forward for a deal being concluded between Iran and the 5+1. The simple fact that Iran is going nuclear, this would actually signal for a shift in the balance in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. And this is why I think that the situation is so combustible. You see how quick Saudi Arabia is in retaliating in Yemen. It is kind of a signal being sent not only to the United States, but also to Iran. This is our sphere of influence. If we are going to be left alone, we're going to actually create or a move for a joint pan-Arab army with which actually to fight Iran, because there's a lot of vacuum being left behind by the American pullout. And basically, this is what the Americans actually do not understand. This region has to have sort of, I would say, a guidance or an umbrella coming from the out and put some order into things. What we have now is kind of a no man's land, new camps, and the regional players are fighting each other, and each one of them is having kind of a huge appetite to become hegemon, especially Iran. But we have to mention Egypt, we have to mention Turkey. This is a new and totally different ball game.
It's the battle is going on right now. Now, when the new king cancels a meeting with the American president like that,
this is
what does that? I mean, that's not a good sign.
Yeah, and I think that King Salman is just adopting kind of a new policy. You have seen that in the government reshuffle and the coming to the fore of some young guys from the third generation and Adel al-Jubair, whom we just saw now. This is kind of a more assertive Saudi policy that takes into account these tectonic changes. Yeah. It means that if we are not going actually to deal with the things or the problems by ourselves, we're going to lag behind. And we have to, in that kind of a Middle East, send the signal to everybody. We are very, very adamant, we are very, very assertive, and we are going to defend ourselves. If somebody is going to attack us in Bab al-Mandab, in Yemen, what we have to make sure, first of all, is to let the Iranians be or keep their feet out of Yemen. And basically, this is something we have to understand. ISIS is in Yemen and Al-Qaeda. What the Saudis are arguing is that they have to be in Yemen, because if not, the Iranians are going to capitalize on the attendance of or presence of Yemen.
As they have been doing in Iraq when it comes to
and this is a very, very exceptional, complicated issue when it comes to Yemen. As I said before, it's a microcosm of almost everything in the Middle East being accumulated in this very poor and very miserable state.
Rebecca Shimoni-Stoll in Washington, D.C., still with us. When it comes to the GCC meetings the American president is going to hold this week, without the Saudi king, what can he sell to those Gulf state leaders? Is there an understanding also behind the scenes in Washington that this deal approaching on June 30th with Iran, that the United States is very much hoping will be completed, is so complicated to carry on, especially now when it comes to the Gulf states?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to note that it's not just Saudi Arabia, apparently, that's pulled out. Really, I think we're down to 2 GCC leaders who are attending the conference out of 6 countries represented. Everybody else is kind of sending their B squad. And I think we're left with Qatar and Kuwait sending their heads of state.
Important to know.
Very significant. Bahrain also pulled out theirs. And what this means, of course, is that no assurance that the U.S. has given them in preliminary talks. And it's important to note that the Saudi pullout came after Saudis met with Secretary of State Kerry last week. That the Saudi pullout is most likely a sign that whatever Washington has offered or has tried to offer is simply insufficient to quell their really significant fear about an emergent nuclear Iran. And of course, there have been conversations about what can the U.S. offer. So there have been discussions about a regional defense pact based upon the GCC, that the U.S. is committed to backing up the GCC states in the case of either Iranian conventional or non-conventional warfare. And one of the real doubts that people have cast is that when the Gulf states look at places like Syria, at the United States backing down from red lines in Syria, at the United States' kind of wishy-washy action regarding the Ukraine, there is a certain amount of doubt that when push comes to shove, the U.S. will deliver the goods. Apropos the goods, another possibility that GCC states may have been looking for is really just better military supplies to be able to defend against a conventional or a nuclear Iran on its own. And in that sense, we're talking perhaps about F-35s. Now, this is, of course, where Israel comes into the mix, because the United States is committed to allowing Israel to have a qualitative military edge, what they call here in Washington is the QME.
Right.
And one of the problems is that if all of the Gulf states have the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter, which, of course, the United States just touted that it's giving to Israel next year, then the question is, well, what exactly is the qualitative military edge? There is another airplane that's very cool that the U.S. could start handing out, but right now they're keeping their F-22s to themselves.
And that goes to show, if everybody has the F-25s and then there's also a nuclear Iran, then my God, who does have the edge in the Middle East? But that's at the White House said that Obama did not intend also, speaking of Israel, Rebecca, Obama also said he did not intend to meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the near future. Netanyahu, obviously a key opponent of the Iran deal, holds concerns similar to those of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries. The president also reportedly told Jewish leaders recently that he would not host the prime minister before the June 30th deadline for the Iran deal. And Tal Shalev, asking you now, obviously I think that we know that Obama and Netanyahu both know what each other feel about, what the other feels about them, about one another. That said, can this fly? Is Netanyahu going to try and fight this through his Republican friends? I'm theorizing here. Up until June 30th, does he have any cards left in his pocket at this point?
Well, I think, first of all, Rebecca, last week we saw that, and Rebecca would probably be better to elaborating on that, but we did see last week that the Senate did pass the bill, but it's a compromise bill, one that does not really bind the president. And now this week, the battle will be going back to Congress, so it'll be an interesting battle to follow. But yes, Netanyahu probably, maybe for the first time now today, has been backed by the Saudi king, because usually we're used to hearing Netanyahu as the most vocal spokesman of this. Right. And while Netanyahu is busy with other mess and is not really cannot really put his attention to the Iranian nuclear program at the moment, there is a division amongst the Republican parties and Republican supporters of Israel. Some of them do believe, there was an internal debate inside the Republican Party, and some of Netanyahu's, we might say, allies in the Republican Party, those that share the same sponsor named Sheldon Adelson, were proposing very far-reaching amendments that at the end of the day were not part of the law, because of the internal Republican pressure. So I think at the moment, first of all, Netanyahu is head over with his coalition and with politics, and maybe luckily for President Obama, we're not hearing him very vocal on this issue. But the minute he does have a government form, he will be back to reminding the world that this is a bad deal. And we've been hearing him again and again, and he has been meeting. There's tons of congressmen arriving in Israel in the past few weeks. Even this week, we have under the radar, we have Scott Walker, the Republican governor of Wisconsin, arriving. So basically, Netanyahu is using every opportunity he has to try and bring up the issue and continue the pressure, even though he's not doing it so vocally in the past few weeks, because he is busy with politics.
He's busy with politics. Finally, Professor Rabi, just to conclude this point about the United States within the Middle East, it seems they are going forward with picking the player that is Iran as a strong power. Okay. In the event that this happens, a quick look at what happens to these nation states that are battling for their existence right now.
Well, I think,
as the clock is ticking towards.
Well, I think that what we are heading towards is sort of I would say, a totally different ball game, where some of the nation states here are going to be fragmented, and maybe, hopefully, will be kind of forged or reformed in kind of a different sort, maybe federation. But this is for the medium or the long run. In the short run, actually, I am afraid what we're going to have here is a bloody road. Basically, we have the Iranians actually fighting each other, fighting the Arabs. In the middle, we have ISIS. So basically, it's not a well-balanced kind of struggle. And the thing is that what I think we should just mention here, after 200 years, the West became or realized that in the Middle East, you don't deal with sort of a grand design. Don't be that pretentious. You cannot dictate the rhythm of the future destiny of this region, and basically we are left alone now, and let the players actually have their game. And basically this is Iran, this is the Arab states, ISIS, and some other states.
No, one would hope that has really sunk in, because I think we're seeing the fruits of that misunderstanding or that lack of understanding by the West over the course of the last 20 years.
Exactly.
Professor Rabi, thank you for being with us. Also, Rebecca Shimoni-Stoli, as we move along. Professor Rabi, you're still locked with us in studio, though. Speaking of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the political storms he's facing, fresh out of the gate of signing a coalition agreement post his election win last month, seem to have only begun. In an attempt to appease and hand out parliament seats to expecting ministers, the government has approved a proposed amendment to the Basic Law to increase the number of cabinet ministers. The amendment would enable Netanyahu to appoint ministers without portfolio and increase the number of deputy ministers in the next coalition. He intends at this point to appoint 20 ministers. But to make sense of all of it, yes, we are joined by Tal Shalev here in studio. And this is there's a coalition, supposedly, okay, by Prime Minister Netanyahu, but the troubles have only just begun.
Yeah, I think the best headline is total mess, because the first coalition opposition standoff begins even before the new government is sworn in. And today, it's one of those political days when I know to tell you how it starts. I have no idea how it's going to end.
Lovely.
Netanyahu, let's explain first. Netanyahu wants to expand the government because he has to, A, satisfy very bitter Likud ministers who did not get their requested portfolios and feel that the party has been wrapped out of all of its ministerial assets. And the second thing is to fulfill the detailed coalition agreement. So he needs this. He was planning on approving it before even giving out the portfolios to the senior senior Likud ministers, because in this such a shaky coalition, and it all comes to that. It's the 61 syndrome. We'll be talking about it again and again in the 61 coalition.
Not only talking about it, it's exactly what he went to election for.
Yes.
So,
I think in many ways he might be envious of back in December he had a much more stable coalition before he dissolved the parliament. But yesterday the government approved this amendment unanimously. But the opposition, who has been vowing a very, very harsh battle, is already and is threatening to have an all-night filibuster and to exhaust the coalition members as it comes to the parliament floor. And at the same time, there has been an appeal to the Supreme Court by the Yesh Atid opposition party, saying that this is not in the authority of a transitional government, and that will be deliberated today. So basically, Netanyahu still has a big legal hurdle ahead of him today, and also on the Knesset floor. And all of this just to say that deadlines are very flexible in Israel and in the Israeli political system.
Another thing the West doesn't understand about the Middle East. Yes, there's that. Yeah.
His deadline, yesterday I was here saying that the deadline was Wednesday to presenting his new government and swearing it in. Apparently, the Likud found a legal loophole that enables them to even postpone it until next Monday, or actually it just needs to be a week after the Knesset speaker, who comes from the Likud, announces that he has a government. So basically, Yuli Edelstein, the Knesset speaker, could announce it only tomorrow or only Wednesday. So this is all a big mess, a big debacle. And the big question on the table is, how long will this last? If this is such a small,
61 out of the gate already, not being able to agree on the number of ministerials, whatnot, ministers of parliament, etc., etc. When you're looking at this, your expert opinion as a political correspondent, how long can something like this last?
I don't think it can last very long. For this week, the coalition has put on the 61 curfew, meaning that no member of the coalition is allowed to leave Jerusalem without approval. It's a sweeping directive, because if just one member of the coalition doesn't show up,
that's it.
Everything is jeopardized. So you can understand how difficult this will be. This is not a unified coalition. This is a coalition with politicians inside who have interests. So the assumption is that Netanyahu will seek to expand the government as soon as possible. There are two ways he can do that. One, by bringing in the Zionist Union, or B, trying to split up one of the opposition parties.
Right.
So the election process is way from over.
It's far from over. Fascinating nonetheless. Tal Shalev, thank you for being with us. Uzi Rabi, always a pleasure. When we get back, spontaneous demonstrations against freshly re-elected Prime Minister David Cameron rock London. He's having some trouble. Well, not trouble, but not everybody's happy. We'll take a closer look at the new sun rising over the British Isles. Stay with us. First, the news. Good morning. It is still May 11th, 2015. This is still the morning edition on I-24 News, the place you should be every morning, because you get to see me. And then you also get to discuss the news you've missed while scanning the headlines with the one and only Ami Kaufman. But I want to pause for a second. I was away for 3 days, 4 days last week. Right. I go away. I okayed the bow tie.
I know, you did.
I did, and it's looking it's looking fabulous. It's very much, and what is this?
That's just, an extra touch that makes the whole thing, come together. I think, I don't know if the people can see it on this.
Yeah, it brings it together. And we need to, please, if we can show the little thing. Here's my finger. Here's my finger. And there, beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful.
Isn't it? Yeah, and I think by this time next month, you'll be sitting here with a cocktail and discussing the news. Yeah, we should do that.
And, serving it to people. Because
I think we should introduce it on morning television. What do we have in the news?
Well, earlier we talked about Netanyahu's new coalition that's shaping up.
Shaping up is a very optimistic phrase, yes.
Yeah, and last week we heard that the White House put out a statement that they're looking forward to working with Netanyahu's new coalition. But what do the Palestinians right next to us, what are they thinking? Well, we have Chief Palestinian Negotiator Saeb Erekat yesterday, who said that Netanyahu's right-wing coalition will bury the two-state solution.
Okay, I got to say something as a veteran journalist of 22 years. The two-state solution feels very dead.
Well,
no, and I'm not going to point fingers or whatnot, and I love Saeb Erekat, but What process?
First of all, you're kind of you're preaching to the choir on that one. I mean,
I know.
I think it's also looks like it's pretty much dead.
It's a sad thing, but at this point, I think Netanyahu is more concerned about how to maintain that coalition than anything else.
And I think people probably in the Palestinian Authority are also worried about their jobs. And once the two-state solution is dead, that means there goes the Palestinian Authority.
There goes the Palestinian Authority, which I think would be a completely different ballgame, even for the newly shaping coalition.
It would be very tough. Yes. It would be very tough.
Okay, there we said it.
But sticking with Netanyahu, we're talking about his better half, Sarah Netanyahu. Took the stand yesterday.
You got to stop making me laugh, okay? But yes.
Sarah Netanyahu, actually the Netanyahus, the whole, they're being sued by a former employee whose name is Meni Naftali. He was the chief caretaker of the house. He's suing them for 1 million shekels, which is about $258,000 in damages.
That's a lot of pistachio ice cream.
That's right. Yeah. accusing them of abusing him while he was working there. And Sarah had to take the stand, and basically what she said the whole time was that how hard it is to be Sarah Netanyahu and how hard it is to run the house.
And I love that you brought this in because, we saw the picture of Sarah dressed for court. And as a woman, I'd like to address the issue that she's very well dressed for court. But you mentioned the Netanyahus, and I think that is a perfect name for a sitcom. Once they finish the political career, the Netanyahus is great. I'm trying to scare the other guest in studio. Yes,
they actually did have a show. They actually did have a show not long ago in Israel that was based on the Netanyahu family. I forget the name of it.
The Prime Minister's, was it the Prime Minister's children?
I think something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Interesting. Yeah. Yes.
And still sticking in the region, there are reports from Syria that a senior Hezbollah commander was killed yesterday. This is Marwan Murnia of the famous Murnia clan. He is a close cousin of Imad Murnia.
I was about to say, because Imad Murnia, his son was killed
His son was killed in January
exactly.
in the Golan Heights, in January 18th, in an attack that was, just outside the Golan Heights, the Syrian Golan.
Exactly.
Attack that was probably allegedly done by Israel.
Right.
We're not sure. And of course, his father, Imad Murnia, who was killed in 2008, just outside of Damascus in a car bomb.
Hezbollah is still promising retaliation on that killing. So now this is the third Murnia family member.
Third Murnia family member to be killed. Maybe in the Kalamun region, which is where a lot of war is going on now between Hezbollah and rebel forces in Syria.
Fun times. Yeah. Yes. And
on to the migrant story. As of, in late April, 900 migrants drowned in a boat off the coast of Italy, and the EU has been discussing what they want to do with this. One of the options that they're thinking about is actually military attacks inside Libya, which is very surprising.
So against who?
Against smugglers and their operations on the coast, and against the boats themselves in the water.
I was about to say, so if the refugees or the people fleeing would not die, so they don't die at sea, let's kill them before they leave?
That's. I don't know how they're going to get around that.
Wow.
I don't know if they're going to start shooting at dinghies, but they're definitely going to. They're thinking about using various forces, Italian forces, Spanish forces, British forces, and maybe NATO as well, to start attacking these smugglers on the coast, who, by the way, have weapons, anti-aircraft weapons on the coast as well, so it could get pretty messy.
No, pretty messy for him. A mild understatement, and I love that you're saying that because that way, because I'm horrified by the notion of what that means for the thousands of people trying to flee the burning region of the Middle East.
Exactly.
Wow.
And when it comes to the migrants that are already in Europe, they're discussing, as we mentioned earlier, but getting a little further on this, about how to disperse them more equally between most of the states, because right now Germany and Sweden are taking about 2/3 of all the immigrants that are coming.
I know, and at the point where I was about to say, where Britain is vehemently trying not to get any migrants in. Lovely.
Right.
Europe staying Europe.
Exactly.
Yes, I will keep my mouth shut. And
Hosni Mubarak, his last court case that was hanging over him, he actually lost this one on Saturday. He was sentenced to 3 years in jail on corruption charges. His sons as well, both of his sons, Allah and Jamal.
I saw that. I'm so confused by the Egyptians. First they release him. Okay.
Yeah. Well, there are a few cases going on, by the way. This is just one more case.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is another case that he was convicted. It was overturned, and now he's being, in this retrial, he was convicted again. He's being sent to jail for 3 years. Now, what they're talking about in Egypt now is
that he served
exactly. He already served those 3 years since he was deposed in 2011. Yeah. He might actually go free very soon.
This is a perfect Sisi move, because Sisi, who is actually in many ways, critics will say he's a continuation of the Mubarak years. Yes. He needs to also placate the people. He say, okay, he's on trial. trial. He is guilty, but he already spent that time in jail. So supposedly everybody comes out happy, but that never happens in the Middle East.
No,
Nobody really
happening.
comes out happy. Okay, yes,
and some good news. The World Health Organization has officially declared Liberia free of Ebola. After about 4,700 people dead, 189 of them health workers, when the disease was declared in March 2014.
Right. No, that is, I have to say, Ami, that's like when we have a culmination of a story that was horrific last year, but actually comes out with a, with a good ending, so to speak.
And the numbers are down in the two other countries, Guinea and Sierra Leone, but only about 9 cases that were reported last week. Hopefully, it'll end there as well soon.
Ami, all the time we have on this bit, because you were dressed for the occasion, that is the elections that I missed last week.
Wonderful.
But you're you're perfectly dressed for it. And yes, we're moving on to the UK, where just one day after the Conservative Party won a majority in Britain's Parliament, protesters gathered outside Downing Street to demonstrate against newly elected Prime Minister David Cameron. The anti-austerity spontaneous demonstration led to the arrest of 15 after 4 policemen were injured. Needless to say, emotions ran high, as many in Britain are still at odds over the landslide victory of Prime Minister David Cameron. None more surprised, though, than pollsters, who are still rubbing their eyes at the unexpected result of last Thursday's election, because polls had predicted a knife-edge race between opposition party Labour and the Conservatives. Little did they know, so it seems. So we are going to break this down. We're going to discuss this, and to discuss this, we're joined in studio by pollster and political strategist at 202 Strategies, Stephen Miller. Stephen, good morning to you.
Good morning, Yael. Thank you for having me.
We're going to discuss so many things with you. And also joining us from London, of course, is one and only I-24 News correspondent there, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Jonathan, did you miss me?
Of course.
I know. I go away for 3 days, and what do? Seriously. Jonathan, though, let's start with you. Yes, clearly this big upset, I even heard about it in Greece, and nobody cares about anything in Greece. And that said, Cameron forming a coalition, but not everybody is happy with what has happened in the last 2 days. And, when we're looking at the results of these elections, how many people are surprised?
Well, the pollsters are certainly surprised, and then some of the politicians were also surprised when the election exit polls came through on the night. Among the more light-hearted moments of the election coverage here in the UK was the moment that former Liberal Democrat leader Paddy Ashdown said live on the BBC, just as the then newly released exit polls were announced, that if they were right, if it was as bad for his party as they said, he would eat his hat. Well, it seems that the BBC were keen to hold him to that, and you'll see what happened next in this clip.
Let's take a look.
But eat his hat if the poll, the exit poll, was right. It was. He then added the rider he'd eat it if it was made of marzipan. Question time is a special presentation for you, Paddy. How Paddy Ashdown here. How very... Alistair Campbell said that if the SNP got 58, he'd eat his kilt. They got 56. We thought that was near enough. So we've got an edible kilt for...
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jonathan.
Obviously, politicians eating humble pie or humble hats
or humble kilts, exactly.
We now have a situation where people are concerned that these polls that we rely on so much during the election campaign turn out to be basically rubbish. The British Polling Council has announced an inquiry into why the polls were so wrong, suggesting that the methods that were used should be subject to careful independent investigation. So specifically, we have the issue, for example, that these polls tend to be done online or on the telephone, as opposed to in any way replicating the real voting experience.
Right.
And they don't tend to poll people who are actually voting. They poll people who
really want to talk on the phone, exactly, or just want to have a chat on the phone. But Jonathan, stay with it, because when it comes to these pollsters, and I think this is the second time we've seen throughout the last year where polls, are promising one thing and coming out incredibly wrong. And Stephen, strategist, pollster that you are, how does this happen? Jonathan, stay with me. Let's grill this man together. How does this happen?
First of all, I think some of the words that we're using to describe these polls, and certainly our esteemed colleague in London, rubbish and not like the votes.
But come on, his accent makes it sound...
Makes him sound smarter. I'm sure it does. But the truth is that you know, this is a very complicated system. This was not one election. This was 650 mini elections. And the pollsters who polled, and if you look at the last few days of polling last week before the election, were not far off from what the national vote was, in the sense that conservatives ended up with 36.9% of the vote. You had many polls coming them in at 34, 35%. And similar to Labor, they were off by 2-3 points. There certainly was a bias. But Stephen, the translation of the national vote to the seats is where the system and it's a screwed up system, right? I mean, you had the UKIP party, which had 12.6% of the vote, get 1 seat in Parliament, right? Less than 1% of Parliament, whereas you had 2.4 million voters support the Liberal Democrats, and they got 8 seats in Parliament, right? So, you know, just over 1% of the vote. So, on 1% of the Parliament. So, the system that you can get 36.9% of the vote and 51% of the seats of Parliament, to me, says more of a problem of the system than indeed of the polling.
But that is something that, and listen, I like you, okay? So don't take me personally right now. That is something that, you know, is easy to say after the fact, because what we've seen in England...
But you would say that before the fact.
And hold on. What we've seen in England feels very, very reminiscent to where we're sitting right now here, and that is Jaffa in Israel and the elections that happened in Israel. And where, you know, a close race was promised. And then, as you said, the last week of polling came close to, you know, what eventually came out. But for weeks, you know, voters are hearing X is about to be expected, it will also affect the way they will go out and vote eventually.
Right. Well, you're totally incorrect. It's apples and apples, oranges and oranges.
I love this man. He's pissing me off.
This election is similar to previous elections in the UK. In 1992, you had the election of John Major. The polls the day before the election underreported or underpredicted or underposted the Conservatives by over 9 percentage points. Again in 1997, again in 2001, you had more than 5 percentage points on election day higher for the Conservatives than you did on the polls the day before the election. So similar results in the UK. Here in Israel, it's a totally different story. Our polls, due to law here in Israel, you cannot report and publish polls in the media the last few days of the election. So Friday morning here in Israel, everyone wakes up and looks at the polls, and the polls were accurate for that time in the election. What you had was a very smart and a very strategic, and if you ask inside the campaigns, all of their internal polls matched the public polls. It was a tight race Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
No, and
you saw voters
that one
move.
can attribute to the end, you know, to the, I would say, to the magic streak of Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'm not going to use any kind of description in that respect.
Well, you just did. The
exit polls were off, Elisa.
So that's an argument to engage.
Yeah.
That's an argument to engage, because what we saw in the UK was the exit polls were extremely accurate, and the exit polls here in Israel were completely off. Exit polls are different from public opinion polling. I think you should, you know, string up the pollsters here in Israel that conducted the exit polls and question them. No one will release their methodology. No one will say how
physically, like, okay, yeah.
and ask them really how they did it, because the exit polls, separate from the public opinion polling, were extremely accurate in the UK, and they were very far off here.
Listen, Jonathan, sadly we have no time to go back to you, because you are fairly, very, 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 well, not fairly, you were very quiet throughout that, and next time I bring you into the ring to support me, you know, we'll have a conversation. But thank you for being with us. Stephen, I don't know who you are, but you scare me, and it was fascinating. So that's a good thing. When we get back, something entirely different. 2 weeks after the earthquake in Nepal, through the lens of photojournalist Ziv Koren, we'll take a look at the pictures and what he went through there, and of course what the Nepalese went through there, which is the most important thing. First, though, the news. Welcome back. I-24 News Morning Edition on this Monday, May 11th, 2015. It is the place you should be, because we get to tell you stories as the following one. 2 weeks ago, Nepal was hit by a 7.8 magnitude earthquake that killed more than 8,000 people. We all saw the pictures of the immediate carnage, but when the initial international shock fades, it is easy to forget that the biblical proportion disaster also made hundreds of thousands of people homeless, with entire villages flattened across many districts of the country. Centuries-old buildings were destroyed at the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the Kathmandu Valley, including some at Kathmandu Dorbar Square, the Payton Dorbar Square, and the Bangpur Dorbar Square. Now, geophysicists and other experts had warned for decades that Nepal was vulnerable to a deadly earthquake, particularly because of its geology, urbanization, and architecture. Sadly, that message was not heard. And important, most of all, to remember that the Nepalese people are the ones that will be paying the price for what most likely will be the next decade. We're joined in studio this morning by photojournalist Ziv Cohen, award recipient of the Photo District News Photography magazine. Good morning to you, Ziv. Above all, you are also a cameraman, an artist, I would say, that recently came back from Nepal. So thank you for being with us this morning. Also with us this morning is the Director of International Operations United, Hatzalah Dov Maizel. Dov, good morning to you. And we spoke a lot on the phone. Before anything else, I want to start with you. I had a chance to speak with you over the course of the last several weeks when you were in Nepal. How daunting was well, not just the experience, but how daunting was the mission to try and rescue people from the carnage? What was going on the ground in that respect? And, tell us.
Well, when we get the call on Shabbat afternoon, it was Saturday afternoon, we got the call that the earthquake had occurred. We immediately started getting organized, preparing ourselves for the worst, being in Haiti and Japan and these disasters. So we're unfortunately familiar to what we're going to see. So we prepared the team, and we go out there and try to make sense of the chaos, because a chaotic scene of an earthquake is something that you might think, I don't know where to start. So you try to make sort of a survey where is needed most. You make a tour of the ground, right. And we end up deciding.
What's left of it?
Yeah, well, it's never easy. You never get used to it. You can never get used to something like this. But you understand that you're there, and your purpose is to try and do good, to try and help. And we build out our mission plan. As we're out on the ground, we had a big delegation of 25 volunteers that came out there, doctors, paramedics. Right. It was actually an amazing opportunity because there was 3 Israeli organizations, United Hatzalah and the rescue units and the Zaka together working on this delegation to try and do good in the land that was terribly struck.
That was terribly struck. And speaking of the land that was terribly struck, Ziv Cohen, as we mentioned, it's the images that you captured through your lens. This is not your first natural disaster, sadly. I think Turkey back in the late 90s. You were there as well?
Yes.
And the tsunami.
Yes.
And Haiti.
And yeah.
I don't know how you're still standing.
I've done a few. Yeah. Actually, we have met in Haiti, I assume, some years ago.
Now, we met on the ground in Haiti, which was one, as a journalist, I have to say, it's one of the more devastating things is to cover these incidents, but also so important because nothing really conveys the message of the destruction a country suffers than pictures. I want us first to take a look at the pictures that you took from Nepal. Let's take a look. Some of the images that you took in Nepal, you come into an area as such, and I heard the two of you, both Dov and you, speaking outside the studio, saying that you were very much amazed by the Nepalese people. How so?
I was honestly amazed. They are such wonderful people. You come to a tent where people just lost everything they have. There's nothing in the tent besides.
And did not have much to begin with.
Of course, but even if they had a house, I mean, they're now out in the open in a tent, and I come in and want to take a picture. It's the whole family, probably 10 or 15 people inside the tent, and they're asking me if I want to join them for tea, just as an example. Or I find myself, after walking in one of the villages far away from Kathmandu, which the whole thing destroyed, and I find myself like walking aside for a few minutes. It was very hot, wanting to drink some water and light a cigarette, take a few-minute break. And this woman looks at me, she goes to her home, and she comes back with this thing that I won't sit on the floor, so I can sit on something. I mean,
hospitality at a time that...
unbelievable. I never once, nobody said, no pictures or please, or nothing. I mean, nobody asked for money. It was just, I was really amazed by the Nepalese people, how amazing they are and how acceptance of such, horrible thing that happened to them just now. It's not, we're talking about something that happened just now.
Just a second, yeah. And none of the, I would say wailing drama, but Dov, I'm assuming that you had the same experience.
No question. The gratefulness of the people there, when you're coming to help them, we obviously came in as doctors, paramedics, right. We're coming to treat them. They accept you with open hands, like whatever you bring over to them, they take it with 2 hands, and they bow over and they thank you, and you see the appreciation in their eyes and how grateful they are. It breaks your heart in certain cases. It really is amazing. But the people, they have a certain acceptance to the situation, and it made it, in a way, maybe easier for us to work with them, but emotionally, it connects you much more to the people in these situations.
Dare I say, because it's also very different, I have to say, and no fingers pointed, than the mentalities that we're used to, be it in the Middle East or the Western world. I want to touch Ziv Corinne a little bit with you because the pictures are amazing, and you always do this. But as I started saying, and Dov, I'm assuming you go through the same thing. This is not your first earthquake. This is not, your first natural disaster.
Dov and I met in Haiti. Actually, we were all there.
We were all there, exactly. We're all in Haiti. And as I said, I personally, as a journalist, and I was a seasoned journalist of 20 years already when I went to Haiti, the people of the region are the ones who suffer the most. We who come in to either help or document still carry those images with us. How do you even separate that when you come home? Because it's so much destruction. It's so much destruction. It's very important what you do, both of you. But, that said, it must affect you.
It affects you if you like it or not. And I spoke with a guy who's doing this for many years, and he said, you never get used to it. It's not something that you get used to and you say, okay, for the next time it will be easier. It's never easier. You don't get used to these kind of situations, because obviously it's not just what you document. I mean, I remember in Haiti, which is not the case here, but in Haiti, it took me 5 days until I took my first shower. I had to throw my clothes every day because of the smell. I mean, you're going through a very strong emotional experience, seeing what you see. And people think, and I'm sure that we can all share this, that if you're behind a camera, you're behind some kind of a wall. But on the contrary, because when you're there on the ground, it's not just what you see, as we see in the picture, it's the smells and the sounds, and you're in this environment which is horrifying, and it's a very hard experience to go through.
Which I think also is why these pictures are so important. Speaking of your pictures, you won an award by the Photo District News Photography magazine, which is a very prestigious award, and you fully deserve it. I want us to take a look at some of your pictures from your book, which, you won with Writing with Light. We had the opportunity to interview you about this book a while ago, and look at how far that got you. Let's take a look. Now, Ziv, you were actually receiving this award.
No.
Sorry.
No. So, okay.
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay. I will receive the award on June 10th in New York.
Right.
But when the earthquake took place, I was in Amsterdam in the WordPress Photo Award Days.
Right.
I was giving a workshop. And as I was leaving, the taxi was waiting outside the hall where I was speaking, and I turned on the phone on my way to the airport, and then I figured that I understood that, So as I'm sitting in Schiphol airport, I was already trying to kind of texting people, understanding what's happened, and to understand who is going, if there's a mission traveling to Nepal, both with the army and the newspaper, Israel Hayom, which I work for. And so we were kind of trying to work out how, as fast as possible, I can get to Nepal from Amsterdam.
Which is what happens in these situations. And speaking of getting fast to the location, Dov Maisel, as you said, I mean, I think you eventually got to Israel, Ziv, and you boarded the IDF flight, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, who send help to these areas. But it all moves very, 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 very fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I got the call on the Shabbat afternoon. I'm religious, and immediately we open up a mini war room in the house, making all the phone calls, working with travel agents and volunteers and everything, preparing this so that we didn't join the army delegation. We actually got to the ground, I would say a day before already, getting on basically any flight that we can get out to that region. To get the volunteers out there, so we get the job done. I mean,
as Ziv mentioned, you were also in Haiti, but when you look at the destruction in Nepal, how many years will it take to try and bring it back to speed, so to speak, or to, you know, when we're talking infrastructure?
Wow, that's a difficult question. First, I'll say about Ziv's pictures is they give me the goosebumps, and they throw me back 2 weeks now.
Straight into the location.
Straight into the location there. I mean, you were saying before about how we can never get used to this. This really takes you back.
Nor should we, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what keeps us human. It will take years, there's no question, especially moving out of Kathmandu towards the villages. But on the other hand, you see the people there, they waste no time. They're not dwelling in their pain. You can see, Ziv would agree with me, on the ground you see people picking up the bricks of what's left of their house, cleaning them off, and literally starting to build the house again. So they're already in motion. They're not waiting for outside assistance.
I think that the magnitude would be probably much bigger than the body count that they're counting nowadays, because there are villages in the far distance, so away from Kathmandu, which I assume that nobody ever got there. Yeah, because the area is huge. It's all on hilltops, and if the road was blocked because of the earthquake, I mean, besides reaching there with a helicopter, there is no way to get to these places. And I've arrived to villages that were totally destroyed. So the body count is just...
It's just beginning. The 8,000 may not be the final number that we've seen. You know,
I estimate that it will double, triple, whatever, but it will.
There's no
the
question.
magnitude is bigger.
I agree with Ziv, because what happened was even our team, when it was on the mountains, getting them up to look for or Asraf, Zichrono Livracha. So when we were flying the teams up, you could not get there by car or jeeps or anything. We would land our teams up there, and they were reporting back saying there were hundreds of people killed in these villages, in Langtang and all these places up on the treks. Not to mention the areas that aren't as popular as the famous trek areas.
Sadly, all the time we have, both Dov Maisel and Ziv Cohen, I want to thank you both for being with me. Dov, such fabulous, important work that you do. And Ziv, I think that really just for the magnitude of people understanding, it's your pictures that tell a story better than any, I think, printed world. It is that type of thing that is so important in this world's reportage. I want to thank you for being with us today, and congratulations on this award. And when we get back, something different, another destruction. But no, the World Economic Forum in Latin America took place last week. We'll take a closer look. Do stay with us. First, the news. Good morning, I-24 News, morning edition on this May...
11th, is it?
You think it's 11th? Yes.
It is 11th.
It is.
I checked.
Got two esteemed colleagues, male colleagues, in studio with me. Nobody knows the date, but it is 2015.
Oh boy.
Yeah. It's that kind of day. We are joined by the Economy magazine anchor and markets correspondent. That's a new title.
No, it's not.
No, it's not?
That's me.
And then I never said it before. My God, shoot me. Benjamin Chong Alvarez, amen to you. What do you have for us today?
We're going to be talking about the WEF, World Economic Forum, Latin America edition. Right? I mean, essentially last week from Wednesday through Friday,
right,
they all met up, all the Latin American leaders, to talk about what is ahead, what they should be focusing on, what are the issues, and specifically, of course, dealing with the economy in the world. Looking at the United States, their northern neighbor, which is from next month onwards, it's June.
It's June.
Okay, it's June. And Yellen has been saying for the longest time, June or September. Well,
there
next month is June, so we're going to see rate hike.
Speaking from the summit, who would that be?
Let's see.
Let's see.
Citizens have gotten used to pretty robust growth in the past years. They feel their expectations have been frustrated, that the future doesn't look as promising as it did before. That causes a general unrest that expresses itself through massive social protests.
Ernesto Talvi, Benjamin, who is that and what does he want from us?
Well, he's an economic analyst. He doesn't really want anything from us. He basically looks at the situation in Latin America and has pointed out various things that are important for us to note.
And what would those be?
Specifically, I mean, if you look at the Latin America continent, the region, the financial region, if you want, there's quite a lot of disparity between, say, Brazil on the one hand, you have Chile on the other hand, which all of the countries have issues at this point because of the global economy. Yet at the same time, there's countries like Colombia and Chile, which have stronger financial systems, so they can withstand shocks better.
Right.
And then you have, of course, Venezuela and Argentina, which have their own domestic issues and don't have the strong financial system that to back up to go against these shocks.
What is the conference trying to achieve then?
The conference really is trying to achieve, it's just like the World Economic Forum that we have every single year in Davos, which is just looking at what are the issues, what are the trends, what should we be looking out for, what should we focus on, what should we improve. There have been calls from Latin America, from different leaders saying, we should be more integrated, because if we're more integrated, we could be the third largest economy in the world. Okay, there's other calls, looking at, the disparity between the different regions and saying, Mexico says, hey, we're in a pretty good situation here because we're part of NAFTA, we're part of North America. North America is going to be the strongest growth factor here in the world over the next 10 years. We're doing pretty good. We have 80% of our exports going to the United States, and the United States is getting better. They're raising their hike, they're raising their hikes, they're raising their rates, and the economy is just generally stronger. So we're not concerned. On the other hand, you have Brazil, which is essentially, facing now under Dilma Rousseff's second term, it's a kind of a reality check, right? In her previous term, she was more concerned with trying to pull up the people while at the same time having a World Cup and, Olympics, right? Yeah. Which is not such a smart thing.
I was about to say, that World Cup didn't really yield much.
It didn't really work very well, the concept of, let's try to help the people, yet at the same time, let's spend all of this money on these things that are just kind of useless.
Yeah, right? Useless, and did not really generate, I think, the type
of
money
kind
that the country was hoping for.
Boost that they were looking for. And of course, we have another big sports event ahead. So it's a sort of a shaky situation. And Brazil just did again raise its hike.
I was about to ask about Brazil because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was about 10 years ago that Brazil was supposed to be kind of the new economic mecca. But it was.
10 years ago?
Sorry, how long ago?
Brazil has been up and coming
exactly.
for decades.
For decades up and coming.
Since the 50s when we had all this good music, bossa nova, all this other stuff coming out of Brazil, this beautiful culture. It's been up and coming and up and coming and up and coming.
Why isn't it then coming?
Well, I think the magic word here is really structural reform, proper structural reform. There's a very important point here that was raised
by the previous economic analysts that we also mentioned earlier on, which, there's a difference between austerity and intelligent austerity. Okay, there's austerity where you just, look at the macro image of the country. You want to look good in the world compared to other countries. And then there's intelligent austerity, which looks at, measures focused on socially productive investments, education, making sure that the country can get ahead on a micro level, because if the people are doing better, the country will ultimately be stronger.
That's like the golden line that no leader seems to really, comprehend anywhere in the world.
The beauty is, listen, you have to have a mix of the two. You have to look at the country as a country. It has to be stronger as an economy. Yet at the same time, you have to look at the country as in terms of the people. The people have to be strengthened. The people have to be rebuffed. They have to be, strong in terms of education. They have to be strong in terms of health. The basics. They have to have the basics in order to push forward the country, because without them, you don't have a country.
So that would be the forum in Latin America, World Economic Forum in Latin America.
Which happened last week.
Yes. Great. But this week, what are you looking to concentrate on?
Oh, this week, we're going to keep on looking at the U.S. elections, which are, warming up slowly. We're going to keep on looking, of course, at the British elections, in the wake of the British elections. What does that mean? Where are we going with that? Is there going to be a Brexit? If not, what's the situation here?
I think the most important thing, the most interesting thing I think about the British elections that I find is Britain going to actually Brexit, so to speak, out of the EU?
Well, it all depends on the referendum. It depends on whether people, want to make that decision, I guess, as a people. But, as we saw before, not taking in sides here, but when the people vote, it's not necessarily always the greatest thing. What we saw in Greece happen, I'm sorry,
No, and I have just come back from Greece. I have to say that. Okay, and I was asking people in between my naps, I was asking people about Cyprus. Nobody's happy now.
No.
And that was a landslide victory. And if you speak to taxi drivers, vendors, the things you hear, and when were those elections? Just a short while ago. This is like less than a year ago.
That love story didn't last.
That love story did not last. No. It's great promises, but now everybody's calling him a communist, which is seriously, that's what they refer to him, which is really sad.
Right.
But as you said, Benjamin Chong Alvarez locked in studio with us as we move to the most important bit of this show, because it's the end of it, and that would be Ami Kaufman with the web review that is the spiral viral that is the web review.
It is. Okay, we're going to stick with Britain, and this is a video that just came out a few days before the elections, but it's still really doing very, very well. It's really, really viral, and I just want you both to kind of get in the mood with me already. Snap your fingers.
Okay, and let's take a look at the clip. I'm in the mood.
Yeah.
That is phenomenal. That is phenomenal. Ami Kaufman, thank you. I raise a glass to you for finding that.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I would have voted for all of them right now.
Yeah.
They should be together as a band.
They should.
They're fantastic.
Do better.
Yeah, maybe they'll probably do better. Exactly.
They should do Marvin Gaye covers.
Yes. We should think of actually world leaders that should be doing Marvin Gaye covers. Yeah, Netanyahu not being one of them. And
okay, Twitter. There is a battle of the sexes on Twitter with some fighting hashtags. About a week ago or 2 weeks ago, there was an article published in a place called the Odyssey, and it referred to something called the dad bod. And it's about this new trend where people are more accepting to less than perfect male figures, especially with celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio or Adam Sandler, and they're photographed or paparazzi.
I love the fact that Leonardo DiCaprio, when he grows older, is falling into the category of men that look not that good.
Right.
Lovely. Yes.
Yeah. So this is the new trend now. Dad bod is considered to be kind of sexy.
It's a dad bod,
that's what it's called.
Dad bod. Dad bod. I'm loving this.
They have kind of but women are saying, okay, well, it's not, where's the equality? I mean, women aren't given the kind of similar leeway in that, and they're trying to push this new hashtag, which is of course called MomBod.
I was about to say MomBod or soccer mom, or yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, MomBod is there's actually I have to read this little quote from the Huffington Post. One woman called Sarah Sweat Osborne. Why there should be a MomBod. No one writes appreciation pieces about the MomBod because obviously we doughy-tummied mummies are not sexual beings, but rather sad sacks who need to get that body back, return to our pre-baby bodies, get a beach body, rock that bikini post-baby, etc.
And the heck with that, because all we want to do is chew on chocolate when we have a free moment of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Yes.
So here's hoping for the MomBod to win that one.
I think we should, and we probably will lose that battle as well. But
okay, this next item is actually about a month old or something, but there's a reason why I'm bringing it today. It's about a Czech tourist who went to Norway, and he was.
I'm sorry, but that sounds like the beginning of a great joke. A Czech tourist went to Norway.
He went to Norway. He went to see the the solar eclipse, the total solar eclipse, but he was mauled by a polar bear while he was camping, while he was sleeping.
Is he suing Norway now?
Well, there's a reason why we're bringing this up, because we here at I-24 want to raise awareness to the dangers of sleep tourism. And apparently I've been informed of a certain news anchor, a morning edition anchor, who has been doing this.
Oh, you people.
Her name is Yael.
Yes. Yes, I went to Greece and I slept my way through it.
Yes, but Yael, you endangered yourself.
I did endanger myself.
Look at this. I mean, this is really...
That's the Acropolis. Hold on, that's the Acropolis.
Okay.
Fabulous, they
Walk
tell
us
me.
through this.
Pantheon. Yeah, I have no idea what happened there. And I think the next one, and that's the Agora Market.
Agora.
Yeah, yes. I was.
Things could have happened to you. I don't really think you should be more careful.
Well, thank you for that.
Now we know how Yael spends her breaks, right?
Completely. Excuse me. I'm a hardworking woman with a MomBod.
Right.
Yes. Hashtag. And
okay. On to Spain. This is a nice
I just want to tell you that I'm taking the Ouzo back. Yes. And on to Spain.
On to Spain, where some firefighters did a little prank on YouTube, where one of them, they're driving in a car. One of them thinks that he's playing, as if he's Superman. And after they showed the video on YouTube, he got a fine because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt while he was doing this prank. But I think it's such a good prank, we should have a look at this.
Let's take a look, definitely.
It's really funny.
¿Para corrales? Para allá.
I'm sorry, but this would have been, and I'm sorry, that's my sense of humor. This would have been so much funnier if another car would have come in and just smashed into
That's dark humor.
It is. It's a great prank. Do not try it at home, whatever you do. Yes.
Well, the Spanish authorities, as we understand, did not find it funny at all.
What happened?
Well, they fined him.
For how much? Do we know?
I don't know the number of, but he got a pretty hefty fine. He's knocking on the window to ask directions, and he says, it's back there. The village is back there, so he turns around.
And the Spanish are like, they must be American, these two, right?
These, I don't know.
Yeah. This is punked all the way. But yeah,
and lastly, I have two Instagram recommendations that people should follow because these are really, really good photos.
Okay. Ouch.
The first one is a guy called Murad Osman. He goes around the world taking pictures of. He's a Russian photographer. He takes pictures of his girlfriend, who leads him to these different places. Now they're in India, and the pictures from India are just.
Wow.
Breathtaking, spectacular.
I'm so glad you brought this to our attention because I now understand this trend. I think that wow, these are amazing.
Yeah, he goes all over the world, and he takes and she dresses up in the local garb.
The local, yeah.
And the colors are really crazy.
No, the colors are amazing. The idea is phenomenal. I hate the two of them because I want to be them. But it just schadenfreude a little bit there. But it's something that I've seen people imitate on Instagram.
Oh, really?
No, because it's so striking, and I think it was that people, with looking much different because I clearly don't look like that, and most of my female friends don't look like that. But
some of those pictures in Athens were kind of close to.
Yeah, exactly. I know, minus the MomBod. Flattery will get you everything, honey. It will get you everything.
Okay,
yes,
one last one, which is a really nice one. It's called the hashtag is called Osiris and Riff, and what they are is a really good friendship between a dog and a rat. Now it's been around for a while.
Stop.
Yeah, this guy is a Chicago 3-year-old Dutch Shepherd. His name is Osiris, and his fellow companion here is called Riff or Riff Rat. And
look at that! Stop.
They have an Instagram that is amazingly
I gotta
popular.
say, the idea, there's something slightly disturbing about how much they seem to like licking each other.
Yeah, we don't have the. I spared you. Yeah, I spared
There's
you.
a lot of licking going on here.
I spared
Whoa,
you.
yeah.
I spared you one pic where he has his head inside the dog's mouth. And just totally.
I think maybe this is the whole thing is a ploy, and the dog's like, I'm gonna lick you for a year now.
Yeah.
So by the time I eat you, you will never know.
Yeah.
So that's the way my mind works.
They look pretty happy.
No, they look very happy. So that's
beautiful friendship.
Should put in the Marvin Gaye music, you know.
I think we should actually listen. That Marvin Gaye music was so amazing. We should actually finish on that clip.
I love it. I could watch that a million times.
I know. Okay.
Let's just get it on again.
Yeah, maybe we can put it on again. So,
let's get on I-24 News.
No, hold on. But first, we're going to say goodbye to our audiences. This was the Licking Dog Show. The Licking Dog Show. Do not forget to tune in tomorrow morning, I-24 News Morning Edition, the place you should be every morning because you get to see dogs licking rats. So tune in tomorrow morning. This was it for us. Stay with I-24 News. Thank you very much. Yes. Marvin Gaye.
I've been really trying.